Bienvenue. Bonjour tout le monde. Hello, everybody. Thank you all for joining us for this edition of the Green Municipal Fund webinar series. Bonjour à toutes et à tous, et merci de vous joindre à nous.
Hello, welcome to everyone. Thank you for being here for this webinar, part of the Green Municipal Fund webinar series.
Featuring a new topic relevant to GMF programs. Today, we are focusing on how anti-racism, equity, and inclusion and reconciliation, AREI+R principles, are shaping the Green Municipal Fund initiatives. My name is Marie Cloutier. My pronouns are she, her, elle, and I'm a Senior Director Programs at FCM Green Municipal Fund. Je suis directrice principale des programmes.
I'm Senior Director at the Green Municipal Fund at the FCM.
Colleagues, Lindsay Telfer and Emma Kirky with the Green Municipal Fund's Capacity Development Team, who will help us out in the back end if anyone needs any technical support. My other colleagues joining me on the panel today, I'll introduce in just a moment. Before we go any further, I'd like to take a moment to do a land acknowledgement. On behalf of FCM, I'd like to begin this session by acknowledging that I am joining you from lands that have been inhabited by Indigenous peoples for thousands of years. We at FCM recognize the Algonquin Anishinaabe people as the traditional custodians of the land upon which FCM's offices are located. I am equally recognizing that I am speaking to you from Montreal, a 1,000-year-old Aboriginal territory, the site of encounters and diplomacy between peoples and of the Great Peace Treaty. I thank the Kanien'kehá:ka, also known as Mohawk Nation, for its hospitality on unceded territory. We also recognize the contributions of Métis, Inuit, and all First Nations, both in shaping and strengthening this community and country as a whole. Wherever you are, please join me in paying our respects to the original stewards of this land and committing ourselves to thoughts and actions that will lead to meaningful reconciliation wherever we live now. We encourage you to add where you are joining from as we begin the webinar. As we move forward with our commitment to reconciliation, FCM acknowledges with gratitude that our head offices are located on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin nations. As an organization, we endeavor to unlearn colonial mindsets and practices, grow in knowledge, and adapt ways of working. As we continue to build meaningful relationships, we recognize the historic and ongoing contributions of Indigenous peoples and honor their leadership and partnership in shaping and strengthening communities across the country. So before we dive in, next slide, please. Thank you. A few housekeeping items to get through. Today's event will be taking place in English with French interpretation available. To join the French interpretation, you can click the interpretation button in the lower right of your screen. It's a little globe. Aujourd'hui, nous avons des présentations en français et en anglais.
Today we will have presentations in French and English. If you wish to listen to the presentations in French, please click on the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen. So you'll see a small globe icon. You can select the language of your choice.
We have two separate slide decks in English and French. See the options at the top of the screen to switch between the two. As we move through our presentations today, I ask that you submit your questions to the Q&A box as they come up. We will address some of them during the overall Q&A at the end. You're all welcome to ask questions through the chat box during presentations in the language of your choice. We will keep an eye out for any clarification questions that can be addressed during the presentations. Let's move on to the agenda. Right, thank you. On this slide, you will find our agenda for the webinar today. We'll have 3 presentations from our fantastic staff at the Federation of Canadian Municipalities and the Green Municipal Fund program, followed by a question and answer period. So before we get into our presentations today, I would like to provide a quick introduction. The Federation of Canadian Municipalities is the national voice of local governments, representing over 2,000 members municipalities in every part of Canada's 10 provinces and 3 territories. FCM's Green Municipal Fund helps local governments switch to sustainable practices faster. Our unique mix of funding, resources, and training gives municipalities the tools they need to build resiliency and create better lives for Canadians. GMF is a $1.6 billion program funded by the Government of Canada. Today, we will be sharing more information on FCM and GMF's approach to integrating anti-racism, equity, inclusion, and reconciliation into our programming, into our organizational culture, and into our funding activities. We have 3 team members here to share some of our approaches. We have Ty Smith, our Senior Director of Anti-Racism, Equity and Inclusion for FCM, who will walk us through how FCM has been developing its AREI+R reconciliation policy and competency framework. We also have Mr. Ely Yu, GMF's Director of our Community Efficiency and Leverage Programs, who will walk us through how we will be embedding AREI+R principles within the Green Municipal Fund and measuring its impact. And last but not least, Gabrielle Massicotte, our socio-economic specialist and manager in the capacity development, impact measurement, sustainability, and equity, will speak to our new socio-economic benefits framework and present practical strategies on how municipalities can embed the AREI+R principles within their projects. So now we will turn to our first presentation today. I would like to introduce my colleague, the great Ty Smith, our Senior Director of Anti-Racism, Equity, and Inclusion at FCM. Over to you, Ty.
Thank you, Marique. And good day, everyone. As you just heard, my name is Ty Smith. I use the pronouns he, him, his, and I'm the Senior Director of Anti-Racism, Equity, and Inclusion here at FCM. And I'm joining you today from the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee, and the Lenape-Wepak and the Atawandran, otherwise known as London, Ontario, and covered under the treaties 2-row Wampum Belt and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant Wampum. And it is a pleasure for me to be here with you today to walk you through our corporate approach to the work of anti-racism, equity, and inclusion. And so next slide. So before we get into that, equity is essentially the center of this conversation. And so just so we are on the same page as we talk about equity, that we really want to make sure that we're coming from the same place. And so when we're talking about equity here at FCM, we recognize it as fairness that is achieved through systematically assessing disparities in opportunities and outcomes caused by structures and systems. And so that we would address them meaningfully by engaging communities that are impacted and members that are impacted, because we recognize that there are disparities among our members as it relates to geography, demographics, and the like. And so we address that through changing institutional structures and systems to remove barriers and increase pathways to success. So when we're talking about equity, it's fairness by taking a look at systems and the disparities in opportunities and in outcomes, by meaningfully changing those structures and systems and culture. Next slide. And so as a result of that definition, we are taking a systems-based approach to reconciliation, anti-racism, equity, and inclusion at FCM. And by systems-based, we're looking at our policies, our practices, our resource flows, which are really key. Where an organization invests its time and money lets you know what it prioritizes. So we, of course, taking a look at our resource flows. And that's the structural change necessary in this work. And then, of course, we're looking at our relationships, the degree of partnerships that we have or collaborations, with whom and how, and also, of course, looking at power dynamics, acknowledging that power exists in every engagement, interaction, or initiative. And so power is a really critical thing to recognize and acknowledge, and then to think through who holds it and how are they distributing that power or exercising that power in an initiative, in a conversation, in a consultation, in an engagement, and how our systems will support that as well. And then, of course, more critically, we're looking at mental models as well, the mindsets, and that's where you get into that transformational change. And so the systems-based change is about shifting the conditions that can hold issues and problems and barriers in place, often unintentionally. So essentially, everything is on the table when it comes to systems-based approach to this work. Moving away from a heavy emphasis in diversity, which is important as it speaks to representation, but is only the beginning of the conversation. Next slide. And of course, as we're doing this work, we're taking an intersectional approach. So recognizing that when you're talking about municipalities, the realities of municipalities will differ according, again, to location and demographics. And the same thing for groups. When you're talking about women, well, which women? To which women are you referring? Recognizing that when you're talking about women, though the lived experience will vary according to race, ability, immigration status. So it's really important to take an intersectional approach, recognizing varying layers of diversity and how they work together to really illuminate the ways in which there are disparities in opportunities and outcomes. So it's getting out of the one-size-fits-all approach to our work, which is very efficient and economical. But if we're looking at greater impact, we really need to be intersectional in our lens and in our approach. And all of this work is grounded and aligned with the global DEI benchmarks, which were informed by over 113 subject matter experts from around the globe. You can find this resource online, a very comprehensive tool that has 15 categories broken up into 4 groupings, within which there are 275 total benchmarks that are assessed across 5 levels. Best practice is number 5. Then you have progressive, proactive, reactive, and inactive. Proactive, level 3, is the minimum standard within the benchmarks. And so we have grounded our organizational policy around anti-racism, equity, and inclusion within this framework using these benchmarks. So it outlines the roles and responsibilities for all employees, for people managers, for leadership, and for board. We also outline our outcomes, our desired outcomes from this work, and some of the key measures that we will be tracking and evaluating as we move along the 5 levels in these 15 key categories. We've also, so that creates the framework and some guidance around this work. And then we flow out into our competencies to make it a little bit more specific in terms of the expected demonstrable behaviors for all employees, people managers, leaders, and we didn't include the board in this part of the conversation, although the board is looking into this piece as well. And so all of our work then will be supported in being able to move it forward. So we have to date conducted an AREI climate assessment to give us an idea of our current organizational culture. We've just completed the DEI benchmark assessment, taking a look at all of our functions across the organization and filtering it through these benchmarks to find out where we are in those particular levels so that we can then prioritize our areas of focus for our upcoming anti-racism, equity, inclusion strategy and our reconciliation strategy development. Next slide. So our ultimate goal as a unit within the organization, and we have both an internal and external focus as a unit. And so we're looking to cultivate an institutional culture and practice that values, embeds, and promotes anti-racism, equity, inclusion, and reconciliation. And so as you're talking about GMF, how do these principles and practices live within the work of the program? And how do we create the conditions for our members and other municipalities to participate in this conversation when thinking about your initiatives, thinking about who is impacted, whose voice is included, who's holding power and how can that be distributed, and really thinking about differential impacts when it comes to the initiatives that you plan and implement. Next slide. So that's our overarching goal. And then we have these three key objectives: to build the reconciliation, anti-racism, equity, and inclusion capacity and confidence of our staff and our members, to integrate the principles and practices throughout our operations and our programs, our decision-making and our culture and our communications, and then of course to monitor and evaluate the outcomes and the impact of this work, and to share our subsequent insights and to continue in an iterative process. This work is ongoing, it's complex, and so it's really a multi-year transformational organizational change that we're undergoing and modeling for our members who are also looking to deepen their practice within these principles. Next slide. And so you can see here a little snapshot of where we are in terms of this vision for this work. We're really looking to create those conditions for municipalities from coast to coast to be able to do this work. Our goal is to cultivate that institutional culture. Our particular initiatives in the medium term, we're looking to build the competence and confidence and to embed the principles and practices of anti-racism, equity, inclusion, and reconciliation. And in the short term, we're really focusing on building our internal capacity and some resources to integrate it as an organization ourselves. So really key that we walk the talk. And then to, again, monitor and evaluate for that continuous improvement. Next slide. And so you'll see here, again, a little quick snapshot of our desired outcomes of this work. So we're doing this with the aim that our staff and members are able to demonstrate the knowledge and competencies to this work, that there's increased confidence, that we have greater representation of the rich diversity across Canada, and that rich diversity also experiences a strong sense of belonging and value within the organization, that there's improved pathways to success and to reduce the experiences of discrimination for equity-deserving groups within FCM and among our members, and to strengthen our internal and external partnerships, as that's an area of growth for us, and just to ensure that we are intersectional in and grounded in this work, in our policies, our advocacy, and our initiatives, and our outreach. Next slide. So you'll see here a little bit about how this work flows or is structured. So this is just a visual representation of our framework. Last September, our board has produced a commitment statement to the work of anti-racism, equity, and inclusion, which is our formal commitment. So it's really great to have that visual, explicit commitment. And then our policy provides that framework, as I had mentioned. We also have a data privacy policy. So we know that when we're doing this kind of work, demographic data collection is key as we're taking that intersectional approach. So we need to know who we're impacting, who we're engaging, and how. And so we have a policy in terms of how to manage collecting that demographic data. We're in the process of producing our strategies, the AREI strategy and the reconciliation strategy. We have our competencies so that we can provide some real concrete guidance around the types of skills and knowledge that we need to demonstrate depending on our role. And we are currently in the process of developing our equity lens. And the equity lens supports that on-the-ground integration across the organization. In fact, today we held our first community of practice to discuss the use of the equity lens questions that a number of teams are already using, while we move towards creating an online tool so that we can make the process easier, as well as collect data around the way in which the tool has been used, the types of data it's collected, and the changes that it has impacted. Learning and development is ongoing. So we have produced and implemented a mandatory anti-racism, equity, inclusion, fundamentals training. We also have, which we launched this fiscal year, an inclusive leadership certificate in partnership with CCDI, the Canadian Centre for Diversity and Inclusion. And we, of course, have other ad hoc training opportunities as well. And that inclusive leadership certificate is also compulsory, as we really want to ensure that our leaders and our people managers are adept at fostering the culture and the practice, as well as able to demonstrate the principles and practice of AREI and reconciliation. And then we are producing a glossary playbook. So it goes beyond definitions, but really talks about inclusive language from with the concept or within the framework of language acquisition. It's really key to understand that this from where the words come, how they might be contested, how they are used, and how it's ever evolving. And so this will eventually be an online tool that our staff and possibly our members can also access to really not only be able to use the language, but to understand how it's used and why you might be confronted even when you're using language that's currently best practice. And then you'll see down at the bottom our 6 key equity issues: reconciliation, gender equity, racial equity, bilingualism, 2S LGBTQ, and accessibility. So that's a heavy emphasis internally as well as externally. And then, of course, all of this is monitored and tracked through our evaluation framework. Next slide. And I think that's it for me.
Thank you very much, Ty. Now we will turn to our second presentation today from the excellent Yi Liu, GMF's Director, Community Efficiency and Leverage Program. Over to you, Yi.
Thank you, Merik. So Yi Liu, I go by the pronouns he and him. I'm joining you today from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan on Treaty 6 territory, encompassing lands of the Cree, Dakota, Nakota, and Saulteaux, and homeland of the Métis Nation. So the focus of my section is really on the Green Municipal Fund's AREI and reconciliation framework. So next slide, please. Many of you know as well, it's always good to just ground ourselves in why we exist as a program. And when we look at our purpose, we exist to enhance the quality of life for people in Canada by accelerating a transformation to resilient net zero communities. And the way we do this is by providing grants, loans, innovative financing, capacity building, etc., to municipalities and their partners. And the vision for how we achieve our purpose and our mission is really focused around being the go-to resource and partners for you, the municipalities, and with that very focus on climate change and sustainability. And within our vision, we make the commitment to the principles of anti-racism, equity, inclusion, and reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. And this very much is linked into many of the things that Ty has spoken to, and we elaborate more on this in the Green Municipal Fund's 3-year strategic plan, really on the why and our approach. So if you're interested, I invite you to take a look at that document as well. Next slide, please. So, the question I think that comes to mind is why a framework? And I think at the very highest level, I would capture it as it helps us think about, communicate, and organize around the AREI and reconciliation work. So at the very top, and there's 3 purposes of us having this framework. So at the top level, the Green Municipal Fund is a program of the FCM, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. So it's very important in terms of effectiveness for everything that Ty has talked about, all the efforts there, that it needs to flow through. So the framework creates a strong connection between the Green Municipal Fund to FCM policy and efforts, whether it's the statement, the outcomes, the measures, as well as the tools that are being created and deployed, both internal and again, externally as well. The second purpose of having a framework is really about making it real, right? We call it identifying and communicating the Green Municipal Fund's levers of control and influence. But fundamentally what it is for any staff member and any group within the Green Municipal Fund, stakeholders we engage with, and clients to be able to understand how how AREI and reconciliation concretely fits with the Green Municipal Fund's mandate, activities, and core competencies. And the third purpose of having a framework is it is really about that accountability piece, where it allows us a focused approach around planning, implementing, and measuring the initiatives that we aim towards these commitments. So next slide, please. So this is kind of the visual of the framework. And as I mentioned, we thought about it in terms of, as a Green Municipal Fund, with the mandate given to us by the federal government, with the needs from the municipalities that we're aiming to fill, and how we are designed as a program, what are the things that we can pull on? So that's where we kind of landed on the idea or the visual of levers. And the levers we landed are on staff, governance, and program. And for programs, it runs a gamut of the design around the programs, how we operated, and the results coming from the projects that we fund or build capacity around. So, and this I think is really meant, again, to link to many of the things that Ty has spoken about, where it is about systems change. We know it's about a holistic approach where it's not just focusing on one thing at the expense of the other. You really have to look at the whole iceberg model, recognize that there are different ways of coming at different issues, whether it's staff or program, but it's very much interconnected, and you have to kind of build this capacity at the same time, considering all these different things, kind of like that all things are on the table approach that Ty mentioned. And with the levers, there is a bit of a logic or progression behind it as well. So for example, staff, the Green Municipal Fund staff that we have greater control in how we engage with staff. It's more internally focused within GMF and the FCM. And it's something that we can have acted on more immediately. For example, around training, really working on helping people shift mental models and really develop the competencies and the confidence to work in these areas. And then we also have the lever around governance, which really touches on our decision-making, our processes, our Green Municipal Fund council members, as well as, again, the programs that we design, we consult around, that we run, and ultimately the types of projects that gets funded. And with these levers, you can kind of see there are kind of differences in the characteristics and in this progression. So again, with staff, it's something that we have greater control, more internal and immediate. And as we shift towards the right, it's less control as an organization and much more focused on influence. For example, with our programming, we are providing some funding, usually stacked with other funding into projects, and the project results are something that we're aiming to influence through the funding. So whether it's environmental impacts or AREI impacts, but much less control, right? That rests with you, the municipalities and your communities. So that's more external and oftentimes more longer term, but it's worth doing. And this is, again, what Ty was speaking to, is our focus as the Green Municipal Fund and as the FCM is not only internal on our own hiring policies and training, it's both internal and external, with the recognition that the more we move towards the right, the more we're looking at the kind of the magnitude of impacts that are happening in the municipalities and communities that really embed an AREI and reconciliation lens and benefits. So next slide, please. So how do we put this into action? So with the framework, it really is meant to help achieve one of our 3-year objectives in the 3-year plan, which is embedding the AREI and reconciliation principles into our funding and capacity building offers. So really how we engage with the municipal sector. And it's meant to be comprehensive, starting with the individual, building our organizational capacity, recognizing that we are at a specific point in our journey around AREI and reconciliation, and we're aiming to become more sophisticated and do more, and really to address systemic barriers and issues. We build from the framework into things that are even more tangible, such as the desired outcomes that link to some of the ones that Ty shared earlier, as well as on an annual basis, we will create key annual targets for each one of these levers. So around staffing, governance, and programs. And this allows us to, once we know what are some of the targets that we're aiming for, we develop some major initiatives, as well as we allow for grassroots initiatives happening across our organization towards achieving some of these outcomes and annual targets. And we hold ourselves accountable through this framework by measuring, evaluating, learning, and sharing knowledge around our initiatives. And we aim to communicate this publicly, the actions, some of the resources that we develop through public channels, such as our annual report, the website, webinars like these. And as we develop the capacity and as we gain experience working with partners and municipalities, we will progress how we work. And for example, developing the capacity to work in allyship with organizations representing equity deserving groups in addressing shared climate change objectives. So some examples of activities that fit within this framework and within our thinking and that lines up with the work coming out of FCM include the training for AREI and reconciliation for staff and council. We are looking at our capacity building webinars and essentially program and thinking through where this makes sense to be incorporating in the design, the resources and evaluations, and into our programs, including, for example, our new adaptation program, which has a distinct AREI and reconciliation lens to it. And given that we're in that early design phase, we have advisory tables where we are engaging actively with equity deserving groups and Indigenous rights holders. So that will kind of propagate itself into the design and the operations of these programs. And there's many other initiatives, including, for example, the project reporting around socio-economic benefits, which Gabrielle will speak to. And you can see that, it's one line item, it's one target within the framework, but the depth of thinking that goes into it is quite expansive and meant to be really meaningful and impactful. So I think with that, I will go to the next slide and pass it over to my colleague, back to Medic to introduce Gabrielle.
Thank you very much, merci. We will turn our final presentation to Gabrielle Massicotte, like he mentioned, our socio-economic specialist and manager in the capacity development impact measurement. Over to you, Gabrielle.
Merci, Marik. So I'm Gabrielle Massicotte. My pronouns are she, her, elle. And I'm grateful to be joining today from the unceded, unsurrendered territory from the Algonquin Anishinaabe, which is colonially known as Gatineau. I'm thrilled to present to you this new socioeconomic benefits measurement framework for the GMF, advancing equity, inclusion, anti-racism, and reconciliation for GMF. Certainly is about implementing or increasing the impact that we have in the communities where we fund projects. And we want to be able to tell the impact of the GMF dollars, the impact on the well-being, the quality of life for the communities. And so this presentation is about how we developed a framework to tell that story. So the next slide, please. We worked with an external team of experts by Social Canada to develop, to revamp, if you will, the triple bottom line reporting that we did. So as I imagine some of you might know, our environmental reporting is very robust, but we wanted to put a little bit more attention onto the social and economic reporting, the social and economic results that we could report back to our funder and to the public. This, what we had before didn't serve us quite well. It was a very broad-ranging menu of 27 indicators, and it was difficult to bring together a coherent narrative. And we wanted to integrate equity, inclusion, anti-racism, reconciliation into the reporting. And so we decided on a couple of guiding principles to help us make decisions on which of these indicators to keep. We wanted meaningful and clear indicators, targeted data collection to make sure that all the data collected would be used. And we also wanted powerful perennial storytelling, powerful storytelling now, powerful storytelling in 20 years. So next slide, please. How did we future-proof this framework? So we looked at the GMF and FCM strategic documents to make sure that the vision aligned throughout all of the work that we were doing. We looked at upcoming inclusive indicators coming from our federal funders. We wanted to be ready for those indicators. We did a literature review, a landscape scan, if you will, of principles of AREI and reconciliation that are in the sustainable infrastructure sector. From an international perspective, we looked at the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. We looked at the reporting methodologies for ESG, which stands for Environment, Social, and Governance. So we really looked at a broad range of methodologies, goals, and objectives, and brought it all together with a focus on if changes in practices that GMF could effectively advance for itself and also for its clients. And so this is how we framed it. Next slide. So just to give you a sense of one of these reviews, on the left, you see a list of common AREI principles within the sustainable infrastructure sector. And broadly speaking, how the new indicators would align with those common principles. And just a teaser for the new funding programs from GMF, there will be a question on how the projects are integrating principles of AREI and reconciliation within their design or implementation. And so we just wanted to make sure that everything is aligned and clear. Next slide. So without further ado, this is the framework itself. And so the 5 indicators are where we landed for to tell what we think is really a rather thorough socioeconomic story for ourselves and for our clients. And in green, the two mandatory indicators and social procurement and community engagement. In blue, three optional indicators. And a note on this, they're optional but recommended. They are important elements of telling a really, not just telling, but improving the impact of the projects. And we want to recognize, we wanted to be ready to help our clients tell this story about their projects and report on these results. Next slide. Oh, yes, one quick note. So I will go over in more detail over the two mandatory indicators, and then more briefly over the last three. So social procurement is really the keystone indicator. This is the main articulation of the socioeconomic narrative for GMF. It blends together economic development and social impact, economic inclusion, fair community wealth building. It's a very meaningful indicator, and it is a way to maximize the dollars already being spent. So here we want to measure it in two ways. So one of them will be to interrogate the current practices within the organization, so whether or not they have social procurement criteria or guidelines or policies. And then we also want to measure it, track it directly as part of the GMF dollars. And so on the next slides, you'll see where we landed on some of the social impact or businesses with a higher social impact. So this particular piece is really a new way to collect data that we are implementing. So we want to track whether the direct vendors and direct suppliers are diverse businesses, businesses with a social purpose, small businesses, or local businesses. So we've developed the tools to support this data collection, which will tell where the GMF dollars are going, but also from a client perspective, you certainly also will have access to that data and will be able to say how the infrastructure project, how the funding is channeled into businesses with a higher social impact. So again, that economic development story, which really is a good story over time, no matter political inclination, economic development is always important. And how can we improve and shed a light onto the social impact of that funding, of that economic development? Next slide. So community engagement is the second mandatory indicator. This is not new to GMF. We have asked about stakeholder engagement, I believe, since the fund was created 24 years ago. And this is simply a tailoring of questions to be very clear about what we're hoping to see. So you'll see questions around who is engaged and at what level. But you will also see questions around the inclusive engagement practices, and you see a little checklist on the left of the screen here. So broadly speaking, inclusive engagement practices can be folded into three categories. The first might be enabling broader participation by the public or community groups. Second would be improving the accessibility of communication materials. And third would be enabling enabling decision-making power to community groups or the public. And so these are, we want to start capturing the inclusive engagement practices that are implemented throughout the projects. Next slide. So onto the three optional indicators. Accessibility is an important indicator. Building to the common denominator ensures that everybody can benefit, that the quality of life and the well-being is improved for everyone. So a very important indicator. We're here looking at physical elements and intangible measures that would allow greater access to services. So this is one of the one of them that almost mandatory. But next one. Inclusive employment and apprenticeship is it's about who is hired during the construction phase. And so it's a lot more directed towards capital projects. And this is one of the indicators that was coming down the pipeline from a federal funder. And we have the tools created to help municipalities or our clients implement that. The more stringent, I would say, monitoring. So this is coming up, but it still is an emerging indicator for us. Next slide. Improved shared spaces is the last but not least, and here what we mean by this is internal and external spaces that are shared, sometimes called the third space or communal spaces. And what we really are looking for here are improvements to those spaces that lead to improvements in quality of life and well-being for people. Physical elements could be adding a bench, adding a public restroom, art installation. Intangible elements could be programs or activities, and improved safety and security elements might be improved lighting to ensure that everybody feels safe when walking at night. So that's the type of things that we're hoping to see with this particular indicator. And this concludes the short presentation on the socio-economic benefits framework, but we will certainly be implementing this, so you will see more of it moving forward. Back to you, Marie.
Merci, Gabrielle. Thank you for the great presentation, and thank you for also the presentation of my two other colleagues. Wonderful. I've been following the chat box. We had a few questions. I know Ty and E also have provided answer. Please continue to provide your questions, and we will try to get as many as we can. I think there's one question in the Q&A that I saw. Est-ce que la présentation sera disponible en rattrapage si nous voulons partager?
Will it be possible to view this presentation later on if we want to share the information with people who are not here today? I think so. I'm going to answer in French. The question is in French. Yes, I think it will be available because today's session is being recorded.
Access it, this session at another time. That you would like to see it again or ask a colleague if he's interested. Let me see if there's other questions. Not yet. I do have a few questions of mine in my pocket. Okay, so I'll go with one of these, but feel free to add other questions for sure. What resources and example are available to support municipalities in the work of integrating AREI+R into projects to be eligible for GMF funding? I don't know if Ty or you want to elaborate, or Gabrielle, I know you a bit answered in the chat, but I don't know if you want to give an example or...
Yeah, so for now, Marik, one of the ways that we are starting to build, I would say, capacity for our for GMF projects is we're looking at external resources as we're building our own knowledge. So there are a ton of resources, and certainly all of the literature reviews that we've done. So we're building library of resources for now as we are integrating AREI into either existing knowledge products or upcoming knowledge products. So it's just recognizing the work that has been done so it can also be moved further.
you so much, Gabrielle. And I think I found another question in the chat box. I hope everybody has access, but I'm going to read the question from Angela. The 5-indicator framework is wonderful. I'm wondering if you could give more information about why under the social procurement indicator, you chose to categorize SMEs as 100 employees or less. I believe the federal guidelines says SMEs are 499 or less. Thank you so much. So that's Angela's question.
That's a great question, Angela. So when we worked with Social Canada, we looked at what was done broadly in purchasing policies across Canada. So it's SMEs. It depends sometimes on provinces. So certainly at the federal guideline, we could increase the limit if that makes more sense for municipalities. We're launching the framework, so there's bound to be adjustments like that. That's a great example of a potential adjustment.
Excellent. Oh, and I see that there's somebody asking a really normal question and a great question, actually, about acronyms. We use lots of acronyms, but what is the full meaning of AREI+R? I'm just going to, say what it is, and maybe Ty can elaborate more. So it's anti-racism, equity and inclusion, and reconciliation principles that we're trying to integrate, obviously, in our policies at FCM and at GMF.
In terms of elaborating, this is, I'm going to call it an acronym in process. Language matters in this work incredibly. And so we've been really trying to work on how to present this work. We think anti-racism, equity, and inclusion stands for itself, but reconciliation is its own thing. And so we recognize that for some people, this new acronym that we've created in terms of anti-racism, equity, inclusion, and reconciliation, which we're using the plus sign to represent the end, can feel as if we are folding reconciliation into the umbrella or under the umbrella of anti-racism, equity, and inclusion. And that is not in line with best practice or the sentiments of our Indigenous partners with whom we work. So really, we're still wordsmithing how that'll look moving forward. We've just launched an RFP for a reconciliation lead who will build on a reconciliation audit that's currently underway, where we have a consultancy taking a look at our policies, our practices, our culture, and our language, and providing a report, which this lead will then take up as part of their situational analysis as they move towards developing our reconciliation strategy, and will better help us land on how we will talk about this work moving forward. But right now we're using anti-racism, equity, inclusion, and reconciliation. At the same time, every now and then I move to moving reconciliation at the beginning, so that it's very clear that we're not folding it under an AREI umbrella.
Thank you very much, Ty. And I have another question in my pocket, as I don't see another one in the Q&A or chat box. Let's say I come from a smaller community with limited resources. How will the application process accommodate my limited resources and avoid the work of integrating AREI+R becoming a barrier to accessing GMF funding? I don't know if you could provide a start of an answer on that, but that's really top of mind for us.
I can take a stab. I think it's a great question, right? And I think, again, referring back to what Ty said around that intersectional lens, there's many dimensions of equity, and one of the ones that FCM has, I think, been very mindful of for a long time is the geographical, the rural, urban, and considerations as well. And part of equity is not the idea that expecting everyone to do the same things is being equitable. So that is something that we've always really aspired to and work towards in our processes, and kind of the very hands-on engagement of our outreach team with oftentimes that focus on engaging one-on-one with smaller communities to support them in their application process, to answer questions, and to have that interaction. And we apply that also into always a consideration of, as we ask more of these questions, how can we be streamlining it, and how can we be helping, especially with some of these newer concepts where not everyone has the same understanding of what equity means or anti-racism. So we aim to be as clear as possible in our questions, our application guide, always with a thought around streamlining, as well as, for example, Gabrielle's really great example of with our socioeconomic questions, we are asking more anti-racism and equity related questions, but we're actually streamlining and reducing the number of questions we're asking, and reducing the reporting burden. So we believe it's something that we can do both and on. And it's another thing where we believe capacity building, which is one of the unique things that we can deliver as a Green Municipal Fund, really helps, whether it's webinars or coaching services that can help organizations that are, or municipalities that are interested and wanting to go further on this journey, providing them the resources and support to do that.
Excellent. Thank you very much, E.